Atheist Nomads, episode 259, Spinning in Place.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to another episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin, and joining me is Lauren.
Hello!
For the news, we have Erin with us.
Yay, for the news!
And then later on in the show, we'll be joined by Bart Everson about his new book, Spinning in Place, which is about trying to create non-religious holidays based on the Neo-pagan calendar. Pretty fascinating concept, really interesting idea. So, yeah, check that out. But in the meantime, nothing has changed for any of us since last week, because we're recording this a week early, since right now, Lauren and I and the baby are at the cabin, and Erin's doing, I don't know what, next week.
She's doing comedy.
Now. Yeah.
Well, I just got chosen as top 20.
Woo!
Oh, sweet.
Whoop, whoop.
Boise's funniest person. So I'm one of 20 contestants, and then one of 6 ladies.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What? That's still an awful lot of men.
I know, right? I was talking to Christine about this. That's my roommate. And she's like, oh, that's a lot. That's like over 25%. Competition would be good if it was like 50-50.
Yep.
Yeah.
Comedy in general would be better if it was like 50-50, but
it's not. And I was also told no talking about my hoo-ha, because my hoo-ha is not funny. And if I do, it better be the funniest hoo-ha ever.
Then you need to talk about it. You just need to say that. That's the whole bit right there.
No.
Funniest hoo-ha ever.
Well, I find it pretty funny.
It's got all sorts of tricks.
It doesn't.
No? Mine's not trained either. Mine's feral. That's what happens when you don't give it enough attention for too long. It goes feral.
Oh, gosh. Don't I know it?
Okay, so one provision.
See, we just did a whole bit there. That was great.
One provision in the GOP's new tax bill
boring.
Was to remove deductions for fringe benefits for employees. Well, for employers giving their employees. And these benefits include things like free parking, meals, bus passes, and the like. And this change was intended to offset part of the huge increase to the deficit that the tax cuts are causing. Interestingly, though, like the rest of this bill, it was ill-conceived and poorly planned and not very well worded. So enough so that it includes nonprofits. This means churches are going to have to start paying at least some taxes.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah.
But you don't get free parking at your job? I don't know if I'm happy with the trade-off there.
Well, I don't know if this means... I think this is referring to, with the free parking part, I think the fringe benefit is there's a parking garage that as an employee you get to park in.
Yeah.
Right. Like big city, not Boise.
Not the parking lot at work.
I mean,
well, yeah, okay. I figured that much. Thank you for explaining that.
Can I explain this to you some more?
Yeah.
Lauren?
Yeah.
No, I don't have anything.
Since you've been to those big cities, you've worked in those big cities.
The big cities, yeah. I didn't have a car though, but I had a bus pass that I had to.
So that's so big city talk.
I know, right?
I didn't like to drive in the city.
No, I was poor and didn't have a car.
That's more realistic. There we go.
Whoa!
Wait, not much changes here in Boise. Then
no. I'm also poor with a car.
With a car.
But yeah, this is like one Jewish organization is quite concerned because they're expecting to have a $75,000 tax bill. And they don't know how to do taxes.
Literally, they don't know how. So you hire an accountant who does.
Right?
I mean...
Now, the thing that's hilarious here...
There's so many jokes that can be made here, but
I know.
We're not going to touch them.
I know there are so many. Yeah.
Because we're in Idaho, and we don't know shit.
Yeah, exactly. Nope. Not going to touch
Well,
that.
okay, when I lived in Tacoma...
Just a bunch of putzes.
I worked with a doctor who was Jewish.
Sounds like the beginning of a great joke.
He had 2 brothers.
Who were accountants.
One was an accountant. The other worked in Hollywood as a movie producer.
How cliche.
A doctor, an accountant, and a movie producer.
Oh, I thought we weren't going to touch this.
Yeah. So anyway, apparently this
Cousin was a lawyer.
probably. Considering that stereotype is there for a reason, and that there are plenty of Jewish lawyers and accountants, I'm sure that organization can find one of their members to do their taxes for free.
Listen,
no.
if the president doesn't pay taxes, then I'm sure they'll find a way also not to pay taxes.
Yep.
President Trump probably pays taxes.
Just not what he should.
We just don't know because he hasn't released his tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's other religious groups that are upset about this. There are members of Congress who are wanting to fix it, but it is not likely to happen because the chair of the House committee in charge of that bill thinks it's just fine how it is.
Okay, then.
Yeah. Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council is quite happy that pro-choice Republicans have been completely driven from the party. Pro-choice Republicans used to be a thing.
Well, I mean,
they have gone extinct. Well, okay, now they're Democrats, but...
Or independents, or anything but.
Yeah. So now he's wanting to do the same thing with gay rights. Basically drive the log cabin out of the Republican Party. Or would it be...
What?
Chop up the log cabin Republicans, the gay Republican group.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. I got confused there.
He wants to get the
like Abe Lincoln references. He wasn't gay. He was just really ugly. Not fair. His wife wasn't too pretty either.
Yeah, so anyway, he wants to drive out any support for gay rights from the Republican Party. So that means, getting rid of the log cabin Republicans. That means kicking out Dick Cheney.
What?
Yeah. There's still that daughter he has to admit exists.
That's kicking out basically every Republican with a gay family member who is out of the closet. Because once they have a family member come out of the closet, they're usually in favor of gay rights because most people don't want their children to be discriminated against.
Yeah, it kind of humanizes the group, and that's... Yeah. Well, I'm not really surprised. I think he should just go ahead and go for it. Turn the Republican Party into this crazy extremist right-wing
nationalist
party, and then have the moderates that are left over form their own party that actually makes sense and can get stuff done.
Yeah. And I did have...
Without the crazies getting in the way.
I had the dream of... back in the naive days of 2010 of kicking the crazies out of the Republican Party, the Tea Party starting their own thing and taking a lot of the other crazies with them. And then we could have, without that baggage, we could have a reasonable political alternative. No, it's gone past that. It's too late. The Republican Party needs to die. Pure and simple. And Tony Perkins is going to help kill them.
People, yeah. If anything's going to kill the party, it's that insistence that you exclude huge swaths of the population. That's going to do it.
Yeah, because eventually they're going to exclude everyone.
Yep.
And then we're going to be dressed in red.
Yep.
And making babies.
And making... Uh-oh. I'm halfway there.
What?
Handmaid's Tale.
Oh.
A reference to a TV show that
okay.
You don't watch.
You don't watch. I don't watch. But at least I get the reference.
Oh, good. It's a great show if you want to...
No, it's not.
Afraid.
It's depressing and sad and a little too close to home.
No, it's true.
Okay, moving on.
How is it too close to home?
Because it's so close to the thing coming true.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Like big political...
Like 50 years from now, kind of like dystopian future.
Well, okay, we have good news.
All right, there's a first.
Northern Ireland had a lawsuit after soccer player Ewan O'Kane and model Laura Lacole got married because they wanted their wedding to be officiated by a humanist celebrant. And the laws of the Northern Ireland do not allow for that. So
seems a little backwards for this day and age.
They allow...
But then again, they still had blasphemy on the
Oh, that's Ireland.
Oh, sorry, this is
not Northern Ireland.
I just pissed off a whole lot of people there.
So they
not the same thing.
The way the statute reads is certain government officials can officiate weddings, and so can religious clergy. And humanists, as being not religious, don't qualify. So the system that the appeals court has now mandated will allow humanist celebrants to register for temporary approval to officiate weddings.
Or why not just give it to them? Because they would have to go back and change the whole law.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's too much work.
Well, it is, actually. That's why they have all those crazy laws still in place from like 200 years ago. Because it takes a lot of time, money, and effort to actually go back and revise them. It's more like just putting wallpaper up. Just keep putting more wallpaper up.
Well, now, like initially, when they filed the suit wanting to get approval to have their humanist celebrant officiate, he was temporarily allowed to do that one wedding. And just that one wedding while they debated the merits of the case. What was nice, though, is they continued and actually debated the merits of the case. In the U.S., if that same thing had come up, they would have granted that temporary reprieve. Oh, look, they're married. They no longer have standing.
Yeah, which is why I hate the standing thing.
So this is good that they were able to do that. So yeah, this is a good news, and we don't have enough good news very often. And for the final news story, Brother Adam Fannin of the Steadfast Jacksonville Church knows what it takes to fix all of America's problems.
Oh my gosh, this is the moment, guys.
We need more godly men in 2018. The world is full of a bunch of sissies and homos and queers and women running the show in politics, and America is cursed. This is a serious problem, and if we're going to follow in God's footsteps and do things godly, then we have to stand up against the corruption that's in the world. And listen, all these bossy women and queers that are in charge, it's up to men to stand up and do what they're commanded to do to take America back.
This fills me with a white hot rage.
Yeah, that's like so much that it leaves me speechless. It's like, you don't need me to say anything. You said it. So, men. They ran the show for quite a while, didn't they?
Yeah, I do.
And how well did things turn out?
I do like all the men chorus in the background. You did not hear a lady be like, yeah, that sounds good. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Women definitely should stay in the home because that's their place.
Although there are those ladies,
and total respect to them.
So I did trim the rest of what he said because it got worse.
Oh, you should have just laid it out, man.
Because he then goes on to how fathers and husbands are the head of the family and are the ones responsible for fixing all of the world's problems.
Dude, that's a lot of pressure for the average. For the average dude. I mean,
okay, so let's start from that angle. Is okay. I am a husband and father. I don't want to make all the decisions.
Yeah, fix this. I just point around the room. Just fix it.
I'm pretty happy with making some of the decisions, not being involved in making some decisions, and us making most of them together.
Like a partnership?
Almost.
Oh.
I kind of like that way of doing things.
I'm digging it.
And I want my daughter to be a powerful, strong, independent woman. Well, not now. I like her being a cute little baby.
Okay,
but
yeah, let's
someday
kibosh that until she's out of the house.
Yeah.
And then go be strong, independent, and
I want her to
rule
be
the world. But
I want her to be an awesome, good daughter as a child and teenager, and then be a strong, independent, powerful woman.
There we go.
Yes.
We don't want to write ourselves into a corner here.
No. But no, this is like toxic masculinity at its core.
Yeah. This is what it all stems from.
I feel like they, may own white polos and tiki torches.
There's a lot of tiki torches involved at this rally.
Oh, this is a church, not a rally.
Oh, I know.
Okay, church.
I know. Maybe we should inspect their closets.
Don't inspect the closets too closely. I think you will be shocked at what you would find.
And one of the ways it's so toxic is everybody loses with that model.
Yep.
Like, there is no winner with that.
Nope. Either you haven't solved all the world's problems, therefore you reach a midlife crisis and kill yourself, or it's not your job to fix the world's problems, so you reach your midlife crisis and kill yourself.
Yeah, and if everybody just works together, that's better. And when dads end up being the brutal ruler of the home...
Dictator.
Oh.
You're saying they've got a tater dick?
Oh my god, I have a potato in the cabinet. I'm so turning this into a thing.
Actually, we're out of potatoes.
Damn it. I was going to shape it into a little penis and put a little bit of blonde hair on top. Dictator. Okay, it's really funny in my mind.
It is.
That's pretty hilarious.
It is funny.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't like this guy.
Nope.
Mm-mm.
All right, well, it is time for a break and then the interview. Atheist Nomads is proudly brought to you by listeners just like you. You can find out how you can become a patron at patreon.com/atheistnomads. That's patreon.com/atheistnomads. And we are now joined by Bart Everson. He grew up in Indiana and Sweden, is a community activist, artist, producer of Rocks, which is the first internet TV show, and predates YouTube by almost a decade, and is the author of Spinning in Place, a secular humanist embraces the neo-pagan wheel of the year. Bart, welcome to Atheist Nomads.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to your listeners about these topics.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and start off with your book. Why do holidays matter?
Well, of course, holidays are a way of enshrining values. By celebrating something again and again and kind of keep coming back to it every year, it's a way of remembering what's really important to a people, to a culture, to a group, whatever. If you look at the holidays, though, that are on our calendar, of course, a lot of them, the ones that are established by the government, tend to be kind of militaristic, or nationalistic just by their nature. Mm-hmm. Then you also have holidays that kind of originate from various religions and faith traditions. I thought it'd be awesome if there were some kind of naturally derived holidays that kind of came from the earth itself, so to speak. And of course, as it turns out, there are. They've been around for forever. For as long, even before humans in a way, but it wasn't until humans recognized them, studied them, learned about, say, the solstices and equinoxes through our earliest science, mm-hmm. that these became designated as what we would refer to as holidays or observances, festivals that could be celebrated and returned to again and again throughout the ages. To me, that's just fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And even if you look at the Christian holidays that are, the big two, they're tied to those natural events.
Indeed, they are. So, of course, being raised in and living in a Christian-dominant culture can be kind of alienating from those particular holidays, or rather, a person can have a strong urge to want to participate in some of the secularized aspects of those holidays, even if you're not a Christian. Mm-hmm. But to me that always felt kind of inauthentic, or I don't know. I felt like a little bit of a fraud. Celebrating Christmas in any way, if that's supposed to be Jesus' birthday. But on the other hand, celebrating the winter solstice, well, that's universal and readily accessible. That's for everyone.
Yeah.
And it
Exactly.
comes
I
a
love
couple
it.
days before Christmas. So, you can get your gift exchange done and then, just relax.
And then really piss people off by saying happy holidays.
Yeah, which tends to happen.
Yeah. Now, okay, so if you celebrate the winter solstice, that's the darkest day of the year. The reason why Christmas is a few days later is because Mithra, the sun god, would rise from the dead on the 25th, 4 days later.
The
3 to 4
festival, the Invincible Sun, or something like that.
Yeah.
Sol Invictus. Is that the Mithraic cult, or is that something different?
Yeah, that's Mithraism.
Yeah, so of course, you can see why Christians would want to affix Jesus' birthday there in absence of knowing when it really was. Not only was it something that was already being celebrated in the Roman Empire, but also the poetics of light and darkness and so forth work pretty well just for Jesus, just like for Mithra.
Right. Well, and if you can get your holiday the biggest one in that week, it's going to take over.
Definitely. It is, and it is definitely the biggest holiday in America. I've often said, if you want to understand America, study Christmas. It's just so huge. And it has now not only taken over the week, it's taken over, a good section of the year, almost like a tenth, I think, of the calendar year is just dominated by the Christmas holiday and all the commercial aspects of it, not to mention all the, kind of just various traditions that people celebrate at that time of year, many of which, you can't see any connection to Christianity or it's very tenuous.
Well, it's even starting to push a quarter of the year. You're finding now in stores, the Christmas displays are starting in mid-October. Yeah.
Well, so I always like to start with the winter solstice in kind of explaining these concepts to people, because everybody, Americans anyway, they all know about Christmas. They all know what a huge deal it is. And even if they're not Christian. And this is something, though, that we can all celebrate, something that I personally kind of started with because it was important to me after I became a parent, especially, to think about how I was going to raise my daughter, what we were going to celebrate as a family, what it really meant. I was happy to find something meaningful and real.
Oh, hits a little close to home here, doesn't it, Dustin?
Oh, yeah.
Of course, I come from...
Well, you guys are new parents as well.
Yeah. And I grew up Unitarian Universalist, so every holiday was your holiday. It didn't matter what religion you were. There was something to celebrate with every holiday. So, I fully plan on enjoying every holiday secularly as much as we possibly can, because I don't know, I think it helps you understand the world, humans, humanity a little bit, especially when you celebrate different cultural holidays.
Absolutely. But personally for me, as the way I was raised in a kind of conservative denomination of Christianity, and we would sing Happy Birthday, Jesus on Christmas Day. And so these days I tend to choke on even saying the word Christmas unless it's referring to, the actual Christian feast.
Okay.
On the 25th of December. I mean, clearly that's called Christmas. That's great. But that's not what I celebrate. I don't want to have a Christmas tree in my house and things of that nature.
Right.
I would prefer to let the Christians celebrate Christmas. I've got lots of Christian friends and family. Happy to go over to their house on Christmas Day and do something festive. But I like to be able to say that I celebrate the solstice or Yule. A lot of pagans,
yes, Yule.
Neo-pagans like to call it Yule. And then, it becomes even more kind of bigger than the day of the solstice itself. We've taken to
you got the whole season.
Solstice, you got the whole season, exactly. The night before, we've taken to, for example, on the night before the solstice, which can be the longest night of the year, but we call it Mother Night, and I try to invite a bunch of friends over, but in particular, mothers of children, and we celebrate them. We have a big, I write out kind of in rhymed verse a tribute to each of the mothers there, a personal tribute to each one of them.
I like
and
it.
One for Mother Earth as well. And then we drink a toast to each of them. And then once the toasting is done, we have a big feast, and then we have a bonfire, and we roast some marshmallows. And it's very fun. It's very festive.
So why do you have that one tied with mothers?
Well, so there is some evidence that in ancient Germanic pre-Christian cultures, this was done. We don't know much about it, but there is something. There's some attestations in ancient texts suggesting that they celebrated mothers. They called it Mother Night, and we have some figures and so forth that suggest that they revered feminine deities or that they honored motherhood.
Any good religion does,
right? Well, yeah, that makes sense. A lot of the pagan religions have earth or anything earthy being tied to the feminine, and the sun or anything celestial tied to the masculine. So that's the day where the earth, the sun's the weakest, so the earth is strongest. Makes sense.
It would make sense, but I like to work in some kind of connection to Mother Earth anywhere I can throughout the calendar. So it's just kind of my proclivity.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Moving on from solstice. What's your next big favorite holiday?
Well, I guess I should sketch out for you the kind of mental construct of the wheel of the year. Most Americans don't even know what a solstice or an equinox is, unfortunately. So it's probably worth mentioning.
Yeah, you have the description for your book is the wheel. So yeah, go ahead and explain what that is.
Sure. So if you just draw a circle on a piece of paper or in your mind, representing the year, you can make 4 marks at the equally distant around the circle, make it into 4 quarters, and 2 of those are the solstices. There's the winter solstice and the summer solstice, and 2 of those would be the equinoxes, the spring equinox and the fall equinox. And a lot of Americans kind of know these, even if they don't know them by those names, as the first day of the seasons, right? And a lot of calendars will say it's the beginning of winter, or the beginning of summer. Of course, what they actually are, the solstices are a period where our Earth's axis is tilted the furthest or the closest, or the most towards the sun.
The reason for the season.
Depending on your hemisphere. And the equinoxes are the in-between points where the technical definition is that the sun passes through the plane of the Earth's equatorial plane. But really, it's the time of year when day and night are equal. So if we have the longest night on the winter solstice and the longest day on the summer solstice, then on the equinoxes in between, the day and night are roughly equal. So those are the kind of 4
cardinal points,
astronomical events, so to speak. So then you can take this wheel, this circle, and rotate it, or make. So we've got 4 marks on the circle, right, for the solstices and the equinoxes. Then you make 4 more marks at the in-between points between them, and those are the cross-quarter days. They're about halfway in between each solstice and equinox, and these are kind of less familiar, but we can make an association between most of them and some kind of holiday that most Americans would be familiar with. For example, Groundhog Day. It's about halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox.
Okay, yeah.
Groundhog Day is also known as, it's also a time that we have Candlemas, which is still celebrated in some Catholic churches. And it's also the same time as Imbolc, is what it's called by a lot of neo-pagans, because that was the Celtic name. And we do have evidence, that Celts celebrated these 4 cross-quarter days.
Cool.
But they may not have fixed it to a specific time in the calendar. So, and we know really very little about what they did and how they celebrated it. It may have been more tied to the agricultural cycle, specific things happening. Like that's when the lambs began to, or the ewes began to lactate for the newborn lambs. That's what I've heard anyway.
Okay. Oh, and also depending on your latitude, planting seasons are different, and
Totally different. Absolutely.
you often need to plant in what's still technically winter.
That's correct. And of course, a lot of people these days, a lot of Americans like myself wouldn't know how to plant anything.
Mm-hmm.
So this all becomes a little theoretical, but there is also the phenomenon of what's known as seasonal lag. So the winter solstice might be the shortest day of the year, the longest night, but you'll notice it's not the coldest time of the year. So the winter solstice usually falls around December 21st,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the coldest time of year usually comes around the end of January, beginning of February, about 6 weeks later, which just happens to correspond with that halfway point we were talking about, that cross-quarter day. So Groundhog's Day tends to be right about then.
Okay.
And it's, interestingly enough, so the Celtic tradition would say that's when spring begins, but the other way that we think about it is that spring begins on the equinox. And my theory is that this prognostication with groundhogs and so forth came out of an attempt to resolve this dispute. When does spring begin? Does it begin now at the beginning of February, according to one tradition, or does it begin at the equinox according to the other tradition? So let's observe what this silly thing with the animals coming up and looking at their shadows.
That is awesome. Yeah, and it really does vary a lot. Like I know in Boise, it usually feels like it's winter from Thanksgiving to, I'd say, about March 1st.
Yeah.
But if you're on, say, the coast in the Northwest, it's just the rainy season until January. And then winter starts.
Right.
So yeah, having some disagreement there as to, when does each season start? That totally makes sense.
And I'm a big fan of, observing what's going on in the natural world and trying to base our definition of seasons around that. Like, I don't subscribe to this notion that they begin on a certain date,
Mm-hmm.
or that the solstices and equinoxes mark the beginning of the seasons. To me, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because if you're a gardener, your seasons don't line up with the solstices and equinoxes at all. Here in Boise, summer starts right around Memorial Day weekend, because that is the time that is usually safe to start planting stuff like tomatoes. Before that, it's spring. After that, it's summer, because you start, actually doing gardening stuff. I like that a little bit better.
Yeah, I've heard that in Scandinavia, they will look at the temperatures. I don't know if it's average temperatures or the lows or the highs or whatever, but once a temperature gets past a certain benchmark for a certain length of time, like a week, let's say it gets above zero for a week, then spring has begun. And that has some implications, though. Amongst them, you don't really know when the season has started until after the fact, and it's going to vary by location,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly vary from year to year, which makes. I mean, that's how we live it. We know that it's not always the same season at the same time and the same across the entire country every year. I live down in New Orleans, and it definitely gets hot, and summer lasts longer down there than up in the Midwest where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. Although if you're in the Midwest, just what the jet stream is doing can have huge implications.
Oh, yeah.
If the jet stream's south, it might be winter until May.
Correct. And right now, like last week, it was hotter in Indiana than it was in New Orleans, which you don't expect, but it does happen.
Yeah. Oh, I've done, the two weirdest places I've done Thanksgiving were Puerto Rico and Michigan. And Michigan's weird for me because, I've other than that year I was in the seminary, I was been in the Northwest my whole life. And it was 70 degrees, beautiful and sunny in that Thanksgiving in Michigan. And Puerto Rico, it was beautiful, sunny, and 80. And it was just because of where the jet stream was.
Yeah.
A week later, it was snowing. But I think we're getting a little bit too bogged down on weather. We love hearing from our listeners. You can email us at contact@atheistnomads.com, tweet us @atheistnomads, send us a message on our Facebook page at facebook.com/atheistnomads, or better yet, call us and leave us a message at 541-203-0666. We might even play it on the show. You can also help us out by leaving us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcast directory of choice. With these midpoints, what kind of celebrations do you do for each of the different points on the calendar?
Well, different things, and it evolves certainly from year to year. We've these are 8 holidays, evenly spaced throughout the year, and we really started celebrating them with kind of conscious intention after my daughter was born. After she had made like 2, I think, so 2010. Starting in 2010. And a lot of times I didn't know how to celebrate some of these holidays because they're just not that familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be searching for some kind of meaning. In fact, since we are talking here in July, should probably mention we're coming up on, at the end of July, beginning of August, that seasonal moment is known as Lammas or Lunasa. And it's probably the most obscure of all 8 of these holidays because, I can make an association, like I said, with Groundhog's Day or Easter, Christmas, even the summer solstice is kind of at least known as an astronomical phenomenon, even if people have trouble defining it.
Halloween's kind of at the midpoint of fall.
Right, Halloween, exactly. But Lammas is completely obscure to most Americans. In fact, August is sometimes called the month without a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it is. It's family reunion weekend. Everybody has their family reunion that weekend.
I think there's also some kind of national beer day that somebody's trying to institute and so forth.
Well, it's because the next week after that, it's always county fairs. And so if you have one person in your family doing anything in the county fair, you have to have your family reunion before that.
That's true. I like that. Okay.
That makes sense. But the concept, as I have, struggled to understand it and piece it together and learn from others, of the holiday of Lammas has been the beginning of the harvest, the very beginning of the harvest, when the summer crops are really coming into fullness. The grain harvest usually is beginning in some places anyway.
The first wheat
at the beginning of August. The first wheat cut, exactly.
Yeah.
So in order to celebrate that, remember that, one of the first things I did was to start to bake bread. I just baked a loaf of bread. Let's do that. That'd be fun. And it was fun. And so then the next year we baked a bread figure, like a human figure made out of bread. And one year we did a cat, made a cat out of bread at my daughter's insistence because she's super into cats. And we also will usually have a bonfire. And then remember I mentioned before Candlemas or Imbolc happened around Groundhog's Day. That's 6 months earlier, right? So they're they're like on opposite ends of the calendar, opposite sides of the wheel. So in order to kind of make a connection between these two holidays, in the bonfire we'll usually burn a Breed's cross that I've made back then in February, and we'll make a new figure, like sometimes just a dolly or a horsey or something,
or a cat,
and we'll save that for the next 6 months and burn it in our bonfire in February.
Cool.
It's just a kind of a way of connecting the holidays across the year and remembering what we did last time and what we're going to do next time, and establishing a pattern.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I try to emphasize though to people is, that I don't know how to celebrate these holidays. I make my best effort. The important thing I feel like is to discover for yourself what you want to do, just to kind of know about the holiday, about the possibility, and find a way to celebrate it. that makes sense for you, for your family, for your people, and depending on where you are. So that's going to vary. Since I live in New Orleans, I'm not, and I'm living in a city and so forth, I'm not actually going out usually into fields of wheat and harvesting wheat at Lammas, believe me. But what I do instead is cut down a frond off of one of the palm trees growing in our backyard. And so I'll weave this figure out of a palm tree, or out of a palm frond.
Okay.
This is a tradition to do, as I've heard, with wheat or barley or oats or whatever you're harvesting. People would make dollies, probably in the British Isles, maybe elsewhere. People would make dollies out of these, out of the grain harvest, kind of representing the spirit of the harvest, if you will. And they would save those maybe to the next harvest to plow back into the fields or something of that nature. We're pretty disconnected from the agricultural cycles and so forth because of modern Western industrial society.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's good to remember. And so when I bake a loaf of bread, I think about those things. And it actually got me in the habit of starting to bake bread more regularly. In fact, I usually bake bread every Sunday, just for my family to eat during the week. And that's something I've been doing now for years. So you could say in a way that celebrating Lammas has changed my life. It changed the life of my whole family in some really significant ways. It's like we're eating home-baked bread every day for lunch for years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's just because I just spent this whole holiday.
Huh. Well, and I'm thinking through with some of the weird oddities we have in Boise, and Dairy Days is right around the summer solstice.
Meridian Dairy Days. Yep. And
they do that every single year.
Dairy Days.
And it's just this...
Yeah, the dairymen of Idaho... Yeah, like milk. The dairymen of Idaho is a very powerful lobbying group here in Idaho. So when the cities were all divvying up the weekends for the different festivals, I guess the dairymen paid for Meridian's parade. So it's now the Dairy Days of Meridian. But yeah, he's right. It does. The cities all like cram their little festivals in, their little town festivals in just, within the same 3-week period, middle of summer. And it's all right around the solstice. And then you've got around Lammas, okay, delayed a couple weeks so that it's not interfering with harvest itself, is the county fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Western Idaho Fair.
Yeah, that's something, at least in the West and Midwest and West, the county fair has always been a big deal because for the same thing, it's a reference to the harvest, and the animals are grown and the preserves have been canned, and it's time to show your stuff off and puke on a ride.
And puke on a ride.
That's what it's all about.
Well, after you get done with the first harvest, you have waiting to do your second cutting. You got to have something to keep the kids busy before school starts.
Yeah. Teach them how to slaughter that lamb that they've been raising for 6 months.
Okay, so then, but no, Lammas though does sound pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's the most, like I said, it's the most obscure of these 8 holidays, and I feel like in that obscurity, there's great opportunity, opportunity to kind of discover the meaning of the holiday for yourself, of the meaning of this particular seasonal moment. So I don't, pretend to tell people, here's what you should do, here's how you should celebrate. Instead, I wish that we could view these as like opportunities or invitations to observe and explore and experiment.
Which is a very secular point of view.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the fall equinox.
Yeah, the autumnal equinox comes usually around September 21st. In New Orleans, it's usually still pretty summery by that point, very hot and humid still. But it is the point where the days will have been getting shorter since the summer solstice. They are already getting shorter now, even though we might not notice it. But around this time, around the time of the equinox, you really notice the change from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
And the point at which they are roughly equal is the point of the equinox. It's also considered according to a lot of neo-pagans, the second harvest festival. Some people call it the pagan Thanksgiving. So there is a kind of tradition in American neo-paganism of gathering to have a big feast, very much like Thanksgiving. And I have found it to make a lot of sense to have this, to try to do something around the idea of gratitude. In fact, I've been invited in to speak at my daughter's school about the solstices and equinoxes. I've done that for years now. So I'll come in, and usually the first one that I'll come in to speak to the new school year will be the autumnal equinox. And I'll give a presentation or read a book or whatever. And then, I want to have an activity. And one of the favorite activities that I discovered around the idea of gratitude, which then has been linked in my mind with the autumnal equinox, is to make a gratitude chain. You familiar with that? Have you ever heard of a gratitude chain?
Wow, that throws me back to when I was about probably 6 years old.
So you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we used to do that at Boise Unitarian Universalist
right.
little kids section.
The little kids section, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I would distribute, little strips of paper to all the kids and have them write down something that they are grateful for. And, we'd have a discussion of what is gratitude and what are some of these things. Anyway, everybody will write something down on this slip of paper, and then we chain them together, make a paper chain. And once you get several classroomfuls of these, you realize, wow, we have a lot to be grateful for. And at home, we'll usually just have the slips of paper there on the dining room table. So when we sit down for dinner in the evening, let's write down one more thing. We'll usually start at the equinox and then just kind of build that chain in the weeks that follow. Just add to it every day. And it's nice to reflect on what you're grateful for. Mm-hmm. Huge psychological benefits, right, to reflecting on gratitude. There's a lot of science.
A lot of studies have come out,
works.
Saying that kids tend to feel more connected to their families, that they feel like their voices are heard. So it's great for kids, great for couples. Yeah.
Yeah, so
it's honestly something we should do probably all year round, but how we are.
Yeah, reflecting on gratitude is something that's good to do, obviously, anytime during the year. So I'd encourage people to, make it a year-round practice. But the idea of a holiday that's dedicated to that, or linked to that, I should say, is that you don't forget. So that, you're going to come back to that eventually, even if you kind of get distracted by other things throughout the year.
Yeah.
It's at least enshrined there in the calendar.
Yeah. Well, and the timing does fit pretty decently with right after the second cutting.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And then, of course, the third harvest holiday would be around the time of Halloween, All Hallows Day, All Saints Day, the Day of the Dead, Samhain, as the Celtic name that a lot of neo-pagans prefer. And this is all, kind of a cluster of time, all right around the end of October and beginning of November. Mm-hmm. And that third harvest might have been a time also was associated with slaughtering the last of the animals that aren't going to make it through the winter. But there's really a lot of other traditions.
Oh, and if it was a good year, your third cutting of hay.
Yes, the third cutting and the end of the harvest season, perhaps. Uh-huh. There's a lot of associations with death and remembering ancestors. So, of course, if you're fortunate enough to live near where your ancestors are buried, you might go to the cemetery and visit them. Since I'm a transplant living down in New Orleans, I don't have any relatives buried in the neighborhood, but I also like to reflect at that time on the fact that we're all related. So in a sense, all human beings are the same family tree. We all came out of Africa. We all, in fact, all life on Earth, scientists believe, is descended from perhaps one single-celled organism. if you go back far enough.
Yeah, we all share some DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So when I reflect on the ancestors,
You're going way back.
think of that cosmic sense. Exactly.
Nice.
And of course, there are lots of cultural traditions. That's become very popular. I'm traveling right now on vacation, and I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana, and I've seen that they've done Day of the Dead community altars where people are encouraged to remember their loved ones and so forth. And there's not a huge Mexican community here. It's just kind of percolated out into the American culture. I feel like it's growing in interest every day. So there's more to that time of year than just going around from door to door and collecting candy.
Yeah, we used to do bonfires at UU. That was always fun.
Gotta do a bonfire.
Yeah, you would write down something. I can't remember what we would write down on a slip of paper and then throw them in the bonfire and have a big old party. We always joke that pagans really knew how to throw a good Halloween party.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of pagans really feel like that's the signature holiday that really sums up what it's all about for them.
Yeah, they've really made it their own. It's kind of hard to do around Christmas and Easter. It's hard to compete, but yeah, no, Halloween, that's all on.
Yeah. Well, and I grew up Adventist where Halloween was discouraged. Actually, the Christian holidays were pretty much all discouraged as being pagan. So there would usually be a harvest festival that would happen on Halloween. It was just Halloween without trick or treat.
The Mormons had something similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they don't want to invite satanic rituals into their home. So their kids weren't allowed to dress up. They weren't allowed to go trick or treating. And instead they did some wholesome family lameness.
Trunk or treat is what they call it.
Now it's adapted to include a trunk or treat where you have all the ward park their cars in the parking lot, open their trunks, and in their trunks they all have candy, and then the kids were allowed to go from car to car without ever leaving the parking lot of the church.
Huh.
Personally, I think it's blasphemous, but
and there's some
I take my holidays very seriously.
There's some evangelical churches in the area that have adopted that as well.
Oh my! And well, that brings us back to the winter solstice. I guess we skipped over a few. I did skip around, and we didn't really talk about the vernal equinox,
right.
Which is kind of loosely associated with Easter. I mean, it's.
I like to think of it more in line with the Mayan calendar, simply because that is Chichen Itza is famous for the snake shadow coming, or the light. Is it a light or a shadow?
It's the combination of the two.
Snake.
Yeah, the shadow of the snake.
Yeah.
I
but
love
on the
that.
equinox, it looks like it's snaking down the stairs on the side of the pyramid.
You know what's really sad is Dustin here was actually there and missed the shadow.
Yeah, because we had to get back into Cancun for the evangelistic series.
So yeah, he had to go preach while this amazing thing was happening.
I was 17. I wasn't preaching yet.
Oh, okay.
But I had to be there in agony. I had been bit by a poisonous spider, and that was not pleasant.
And let's see, the only two that we kind of left out then is May Day, Beltane.
Oh yes.
Which is the 1st of May. That's sometimes. There's a book out called America's Forgotten Holiday.
Oh, right, because it was a big deal. You had the maypole and tons of flower-related crafts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's an episode of, I think, the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah.
Where they're celebrating May Day. But
bring it back.
The other tradition that kind of emerged at that time, also here in America, was International Workers' Day, because started especially a lot of activity in Chicago that was associated with around May Day, and eventually with kind of the radical organized left, socialists, communists, anarchists, and so forth. This eventually was embraced by the international community and is now celebrated in most of the world except for America, because we were worried about radicalization, and I think it was Grover Cleveland who established Labor Day in September specifically to kind of suck the air out of May Day.
Oh, wow.
And it worked. And now May Day is virtually forgotten about. And when we see people celebrating in like former Soviet countries and so forth, we see them celebrating May Day, and we think that they invented it, when in fact we invented it. The struggle for the 8-hour day for having weekends off and so forth all emerged from that period of time in the late 1800s, post-Civil War America. So there's a lot of history to be learned there. I always try to try to find out about some kind of worker organized march to join in on. I usually can't find out about it until it's too late for whatever reason, but I feel like it's an important time to make some connections and remember the power of organizing, the power of coming together. The other aspect of that holiday, of course, is coming together because of erotic attraction. So for a lot of pagans, it's a celebration of sex, and dancing around the maypole is just a prelude to other things.
Well, and planting and sex have always gone together in traditional cultures because it's all fertility. Right.
It's a fertility ritual. The maypole is pretty graphic. If I don't know if you guys have ever seen a maypole with a garland of flowers at the top. It's like a circular garland of flowers, and then as the ribbons get wound around the maypole, this ring of flowers slowly slides down the pole. It's beautiful.
Yep. Yeah. We used to do that when I was little too. You know, it's so funny. I'm remembering all this stuff, and I don't think the current UU does any of this stuff anymore. I should start. Well, I should head over and start teaching them the old ways. I say, as a 30-year-old.
Yeah, well, maybe you should. I know that of course, every UU congregation is different, but there is, nationally speaking, a large contingent of pagans in UU.
Absolutely, very welcomed.
Yeah.
Well, if that has faded away, it's probably back here locally, since the new minister there is a pagan.
Yeah, we have to go check that out.
Yeah, one reason I was drawn to paganism after my daughter was born is, again, looking for a sense of how am I going to raise her? What kind of traditions is she going to know about, and so forth, and kind of exploring around. I felt like paganism was in somewhat neo-paganism was in some ways what's the word I'm looking for? Compatible with a naturalistic, atheistic, secular worldview. And, of course, I came to learn that under this, that there is no one well-defined pagan religion. There's a whole bunch of different kind of new religions that are out there, such as Wicca and Druidry and other paths. But it's by no means clear that they're all compatible with that kind of worldview. So since that time, I've learned, and made connections with a bunch of other people who kind of also have a naturalistic worldview, and we've been trying to articulate a kind of naturalistic paganism, and that's out there, but it's one of many varieties. So anybody who's listening to this should know that pagans come in all shapes and sizes and colors and varieties of ideas about the supernatural and so forth.
And most of them love to party.
No means, yes, but there is generally kind of a celebratory approach to life, and there is also just kind of a general culture of I don't really care what your philosophy is necessarily, or I don't have a problem. There's not an orthodoxy, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm able to gather with my circle in New Orleans, and we're able to celebrate these holidays together, do rituals together, and we don't necessarily get into theological disputes or arguments about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin or whatever. It all seems kind of academic. What's more important is coming together, having a community, and celebrating life and the earth and the fact that we're alive on the earth and our relationship to one another.
All right. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
So, and I definitely think that separating it out as evenly as possible around the calendar makes a lot more sense than this weird clumping that we have in the US, where you have 3 holidays in, 5 weeks?
Oh, right. Christmas, New Year's, and
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, yeah, I agree.
So it makes it so that your time off from work, and actually it even gets even worse than that, if you're dealing with teams, like working in anything in IT, you can't get anything done from the Monday before Thanksgiving until usually a week after New Year's.
Yeah, when
We should just do it like the Chinese and just take the whole month off.
when I started looking at the wheel of the year, I was really taken by the symmetry of it and the beauty of it, and I've discovered all kinds of artwork that different people have made to kind of represent the wheel of the year, and it's so aesthetically compelling to me that when I come back to the cultural reality that I live in and realize that not everybody knows about this, not everybody celebrates it. In fact, we have instead of that, we have this kind of messed up calendar that's just kind of unbalanced and it's what would Spock say? Highly illogical.
Yeah.
It just kind of drives me crazy. And then when you actually start looking at the calendar itself, the months and the days and the way that our calendar is configured, it really makes no sense at all. It's just kind of a historical accident.
Uh-huh.
It's the best we could do, and we would do well to reform our calendar, but it just seems like so far out of our grasp right now when we're struggling with so many issues.
Oh man, even just the reform from Julian to Gregorian
was hugely controversial.
And it took 400 years? Russia didn't switch until after the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to shift everything, 10 days or so? Oh, that'd be just as rough. Right,
because we could have, it just seems like it would make the most sense to have a 364-day calendar with maybe the winter solstice as one day that's outside of the structure of weeks. But if you have 364 days, it divides into 7 very nicely. You can have 13 months of 4 weeks each. Each week, 7 days. Everything lines up perfectly. And then you just have that one day a year that's outside of the whole cycle. But apparently, this is a problem if you subscribe to the notion that you have to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy.
Uh-huh. And that would also make it so much easier for doing a leap day because you just add a day at the summer solstice.
Yeah, exactly. And it's beautiful. I've seen these proposals out there, and I find them hugely compelling. But I just don't see us. I despair of actually seeing us make that change. On the other hand, 25 years ago, I didn't think we'd be legalizing marijuana, and here it is legal in some form over half the states in the union. So never say never.
Yep.
And now legal in Canada, and a number of countries in Europe are assessing it. Yeah, it's changing. All right. Shifting gears now. Were you raised religious?
Oh, yeah. I was raised in a rather, in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Okay.
Which you may be familiar with. Missouri Synod is kind of the, I always hasten to add denominational clarification because a lot of people have an image of Lutherans as being like, Prairie Home Companion, Garrison Keillor. But the Missouri Synod is much more conservative and represents that kind of strain in Lutheran thought of the quest for pure doctrine. So big emphasis on correct doctrine. And it's just kind of spoiled Christian imagery and Christian, what would you call it, liturgy form. I just really can't relate to it. Christian mythology. It's interesting, because I find an interest in all the mythologies of the world, and I wish I could say that I felt that for Christianity, but I kind of don't anymore. And it's I guess, overcompensation for the way I was raised.
Well, and even if you just look at it from the standpoint of a Greek adaptation of Jewish mythology, doesn't make a lot of sense for generalizing across the world.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
Yeah. So does Missouri Synod, do they follow the liturgical calendar?
Yes, I suppose they do. Advent and Lent and all of that. Yes.
Okay. So
I was raised celebrating Easter and Christmas and so.
So you were, the way you were raised, each of those holidays was very Christian. That's
true. The ones that I knew of course, we didn't celebrate Candlemas.
Right. Okay, because I was being raised Adventist. Those, Christmas and Easter and the rest of the liturgical calendar were rejected as being Catholic or pagan in origin.
Right.
And so any celebration we did of those was purely secular. So Christmas and Easter for me were never religious holidays.
Oh, that's bizarre to me.
Yeah, that's not normal.
A bizarre thought.
Yeah. Okay, so then how did you end up in Sweden?
So I was an exchange student. Lived up in northern Sweden for a year, and rather close to the Arctic Circle. It was a pretty tough year, I've got to say. Besides so I just had my kind of deconversion experience, and in America, and then I shipped off to the a cold, dark, lonely place.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I was filled with teenage angst, and that informed a lot of my experience there. I used to tell people it was the worst year of my life, but of course then I was living in New Orleans in 2005. We all know what happened. So that kind of took the title of the worst. But in Sweden, even though I had a tough time of it, now that it's behind me, now that it's something I look back on, it was really a great experience. It was just so expanding to my horizons, to live in a foreign country, to learn to speak another language, to see another another form of government. It really just added so much.
All right.
And they do still celebrate some of these holidays that we've forgotten about. So, I saw a big bonfire there on the April 30th. It was for, Walpurgisnacht. Walpurgisnacht is the German name. I think it's called Valborg or some such in Swedish. Of course, that was like 30 years ago. And it was, I had no idea what was going on, but it was very intriguing to me.
Yeah. It's interesting how many other countries still follow some of these holidays or have adapted them. Even just Mexico and Canada alone. America seems to have done a very poor job of holidays in general.
Well, if you look hard enough, there's a holiday for almost every day. You just got to look.
Yeah, very, very obscure holidays.
Okay, so I didn't mean to skip over your deconversion experience. So how did you end up leaving Lutheranism? Well,
there's not much to it on the surface. It was just one of those experiences. I was about 17 years old and sitting in the balcony of the church and realizing that everything I believed up to that point was just kind of based on an accident of birth. I just happened to have been born into a Christian family, and therefore I kind of uncritically accepted all of this stuff. But if I'd been born in India, chances are I would have been raised with very different ideas. And so just like that, suddenly it just all came crumbling down, right? My whole worldview. And I really was kind of, although I had a very naive and kind of childish outlook, I'd taken all that stuff very much to heart, right? It wasn't just something I gave lip service to. All the doctrine, all the training that I'd received through the church, I kind of believed it all very sincerely. And so it was personally devastating to me to have this crumble away.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the next few years, trying to rebuild my myself, my sense of self, my try to make sense of world, a world that was very different from the world that I thought I'd been living in, because there's all the cosmology and so forth that I had to find a new one, had to look for new meaning and a new understanding of purpose and values and so forth. So I went through some pretty dark, nihilistic times, and I was pretty bitter for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But that was all pretty long ago, and I feel like I was kind of just then just an atheist for about 25 years before discovering a new aspect to I guess this neo-pagan stuff, discovering a new way of relating to myself, other humans, and the world. And I didn't see that as this kind of spiritual reawakening, if you will. I didn't see that as a contradiction with any of with this 25 years of atheism. I saw it as an extension and just a kind of a further expansion of my horizons. I don't know how else to put it. To me, it's been very important to maintain consistency of not believing things for which there's no evidence, of not, like supernatural beliefs. That just doesn't work for me. So it's been important to my sense of integrity to say that I'm still have a naturalistic worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right. And where can our listeners find your book and find out more about you?
Well, probably the best place would be barteverson.com. The book can be found on Amazon. The book is Spinning in Place, is a Kindle only right now. So if you're looking for a paperback or hardcover, you're out of luck for right now. I do hope someday to maybe get a hard copy version available for purchase. But right now, it's Kindle only.
Okay.
Of course, if you don't have a Kindle, you can get an app, Kindle app, for other devices and read it that way. It is super cheap because this is not some kind of money-making scheme for me. I just want to get the ideas out there. It's more important to me, actually. I tell people that the reason I wrote the book was not to sell a bunch of copies of a book, but instead to have conversations like this one. To speak to people about some of these ideas that I just think are important. So I've tried to reach out to secular humanist groups, atheist groups, freethinker groups, and give presentations and talks and so forth. And so that's why I was so glad to be able to come here on to Atheist Nomads and talk about these ideas.
Awesome.
And, okay, so you got your website. What's your Twitter handle?
So on Twitter, I'm editor_B.
All right.
But there's an underscore.
We'll throw back to
my
Rocks.
role, exactly. My role as with the Rocks television show, I was the video editor. So Editor B is kind of my nickname.
All right. Very cool. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atheist Nomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.